Hi, welcome back. Let's do a brief summary of the creation, fall, redemption account. This is the biblical worldview. I want you to take notes on this. I don't have any notes. I just have notes that are maybe in the margins here that you can look at my chicken scratch there, but you can jot down notes as you listen. Under the creation, some of the things we've noticed are: 1. Original creation is ex nihilo, from nothing, no previously existing material. So we get that from here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth from nothing. So original creation is ex nihilo. You can see it here in my notes. Point 2, subsequent creation is by separation and by forming and filling. And we talked about that a lot. Point 3, natural evil is not original. There's no natural evil, and we saw it in it was good, it was good, it was good, and it was very good. And we see that they're given the green plants for food. So they're not eating each other. There's no toil, strife, old age, sickness, death originally. Point 4, each thing is created after its own kind. I made a point to point that out. I emphasized it. How about that? Each thing was created according to its kind, according to their kinds, and we counted 7 times. Point 5, the humans are given the work of dominion, and that work is to rule. So I mentioned that ruling and emphasized that. And then they're given the Sabbath day. Where was the Sabbath day? Here it is. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so he rested from all his work, and he blessed the Sabbath day, made it holy. And the Sabbath day is to be a reminder to the humans, a perpetual reminder until the end of time of their origin, of their destiny, of their hope. And God gave them the pattern of work and rest. And so now with the fall, there's going to be more work, and that work is to rule over sin. We'll see that when we get to the account of Cain and Abel. God tells Cain, sin is crouching at your door and it wants to have you, but you must rule over it. So we have to rule over moral evil, and we have to rule with the conditions of natural evil too now. And then the 7th point under the creation is that man is made in the image of God. So I think that was here. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Okay, so 7 points under the creation. Original creation is ex nihilo. Subsequent creation by forming and filling. No natural evil originally. Each thing is created after its own kind. And the work of dominion is given to them. They have the Sabbath day, and they're made in the image of God. Summary of the creation, the theme of creation. Now let's talk about the theme of the fall, and it comes when we start looking at chapter 2. It's in the context of the covenant. So here I have the covenant, and there's the covenant and there's representation. Adam is going to represent all of humanity. So point one under the fall is covenant and representation. Adam is in covenant with God, and this is a relationship between God and humans. But there's also a relationship that's a covenant between man and woman in marriage. So there's a covenant between God and between man and woman. And remember, in a covenant, the invisible reveals the visible. Adam is to represent all of humankind, and part of this is that Eden is the biological and the spiritual center, the geographical center of everything. So all of life is going to flow from the garden, including spiritual life and spiritual death. We have point 2 under the fall, probation and manifestation. So Adam is given a test, and we have it in the 2 trees here, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The 2 trees are physical signs that represent a spiritual reality. So there's 2 ways before mankind always, the way of life and the way of death, the way of the knowledge of God, or the good, and the way of the knowledge of good and evil, or evil, death. So good and evil, always before humans. Point 3 is sin. And we see sin happening before they eat. Remember when we get to chapter 3, we saw her already misunderstanding about the trees. So sin is not seeking, not understanding, and not doing what is right. We'll see that repeated throughout the scriptures. It's also sometimes called autonomy, being a law to oneself, unbelief, not believing in God, and it's coming short of the glory of God. So in Christianity, they'll talk about the sins of omission and the sins of commission. Omission is where you fail to do what you ought to do. Commission is where you do things you're not supposed to do. And Adam failed to seek God and understand God. Those are the omission. And the commission is he ate of the tree. All right, we see sin. And point 4 is we see death, spiritual death. What does that look like in concrete terms? When you don't seek to know God, you won't understand. And when you don't understand, and humans need to understand, we're reasoning beings, we're called to rule. When we don't rule, things will become meaningless. And meaninglessness is intolerable for beings that need meaning. And so we get bored. And maybe in the garden that's what's going on. They left off the work of understanding and naming the creation, and they're bored. And she's seeking this wisdom apart from work, and he's looking at her. He probably wants to please her. And boredom leads to excess, doing what is wrong. And when we do what is wrong, we feel guilt. So meaninglessness, boredom, and guilt is spiritual death. And we'll see this all throughout the scriptures. Spiritual death, meaninglessness, boredom, and guilt. That was point 4 under the fall. Point 5 is that evil, this is called theodicy. Evil is allowed by God to happen, and he does it to deepen the good. So remember, the good is knowing God through all that whereby God makes himself known. Well, now God is going to use this moral evil as a means of deepening the revelation. And what is it going to deepen? Now we have enmity between the, let's say, believers and unbelievers. And believers are going to manifest life. Unbelievers are going to manifest death, spiritual death. And when God calls us back through natural evil, that's merciful. And some will exit the way of death and enter the way of life. That's redemption. And God is working to redeem his people. This is mercy. But it would be just for God to leave those in moral evil who aren't believers and who don't want God. So those who don't believe, their lives are going to manifest God's infinite justice. He's going to leave them in their condition, and the inherent consequences of spiritual death are going to reveal what moral evil deserves. Those who believe are brought out of death into life through God's mercy. These people's lives will manifest God's mercy. So we have a deeper revelation when evil happens. It reveals mercy to some, justice to some. And for those who are seeking to know God, they're looking on, and they will see how God's mercy is manifest in their lives. And they will say something like Martin Luther said, there but for the grace of God go I. I too was in that condition of death, and God saved me. So this evil will be used to deepen the revelation of who God is. Okay, that's called the theodicy. in theological terms. Okay, but where's redemption in this story? You're wondering. It's there, and it's in the place where you wouldn't expect it. It's in the curse. It's in the promise. So there are calls to repentance, 3 calls, and you can look at my notes over here to see where they are. See over here? So the 5 points under redemption. The first point is call to repentance number 1. And the first call is inward, and it's shame. Shame is like conscience. And the man and the woman's response is to cover themselves. Self-deception. And God doesn't leave them in that condition, though he could. The second call comes to them, and it's external. God says, "Where are you?" And their response is self-justification. They blame others. Remember that? Okay, so that was under number 1. Shame and where are you? Inward call, outward call. They dig in further. The second point is that God imposes the curse and brings the promise. This is the third call to repentance. The curse is toil, strife, old age, sickness, and physical death. And he also gives the promise, an age-long, agonizing spiritual war in which good will overcome evil. And there's going to be a new covenant head. He is going to do what Adam failed to do, perfectly obey God, and undo what Adam did, which is bring in moral evil and natural evil. So that's what you should expect the Messiah to do. He should be the new covenant head that does and undoes Adam's sin, does the obedience and undoes the sin. Are you seeing redemption coming? Point 3. They respond with repentance and faith. Repentance is change your way. They're going down the wrong path, the path of moral evil and spiritual death. Repentance is change your way, turn around. And this turning around is from death to life. And God's the one that changes them. We'll see this throughout the scriptures. Death to life. Spiritual death to spiritual life. And we know that this happens because he names his wife Eve. They are going to obey the command to be fruitful and multiply and live under the curse now. And they have faith in the promise that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. So God justifies them. This is point 4, justification. It's a theological term. It's how they're forgiven. God is going to cover their sin through the death of another. Again, in Christianity, this is the Messiah. The death of another is required to pay. And in Christianity, it's an infinite death, infinite debt that is going to require an infinite person to pay the debt. All right, point 5 under redemption is sanctification. Sanctification is cleansing from sin. So they're forgiven in justification, and now they have to be cleansed. And they're cleansed by being expelled from the Garden of Eden, and they're going to have to go through the process of knowing the hard way through suffering. Suffering is sanctifying, it's cleansing. It teaches them you can't determine good and evil for yourself. You can't be like God. You are not God. You are creation. You are creatures. The creatures don't determine good and evil. The creatures have to obey the law of their nature, which is the very thing they didn't want. So here we see the themes come out in concrete terms. I would like you to know the points. Let's see how many. There were 7 points under creation, 5 points under the fall, and 5 points under redemption. I would like you to know those for the exam. And you can, I don't know if you can, but you can look through my notes. It's all in there. It's all in there. So I made a copy of this handout for you to see how did students in the past do it. It's a model for you to take notes. Okay, I'm going to pause here. From here, we're going to look at Genesis 5 through 11. And then we're going to go from 11 to 22. We're going to see what happens after Adam and Eve, after they're expelled from the garden. It's a divine drama being worked out. Stay tuned.